The photo was everywhere, splashed across front pages, pushed onto phone screens, replayed on evening broadcasts. A judge robed in authority just days before, now in handcuffs, his eyes downcast as flashbulbs cracked through the air. The image cut like glass, a symbol of justice inverted, dignity dragged into disgrace. Gasps followed it from newsroom to living room, each viewer caught between outrage and disbelief. When the image of a sitting judge in handcuffs hit the news, America froze, and it was in that frozen silence that the Senate chamber came alive. Reporters pressed forward, cameras locked, the tension thick enough to choke on. At the long table under harsh lights sat Kash Patel, the operative who had made a career of sidestepping, smirking, and spinning. But this time, across from him, sat Chris Van Hollen, calm, sharp-eyed, and unwilling to let the moment slip into noise, his voice cut through the murmurs with the weight of the photo still hanging in the air. "Mr. Patel, answer this. How do you justify this?" The room stilled. Senators leaned forward. America leaned forward. And Patel, for the first time, seemed unsure of his smile. What happened next left the chamber stunned. A judge in handcuffs is more than a headline. It is a rupture in the very idea of justice, an image that challenges faith in institutions and shakes the belief that the law stands above corruption. For millions of Americans, it was not just about one man in cuffs. It was about whether the system still had the strength to hold the powerful accountable, or whether justice itself had been hijacked, that weight pressed into the Senate hearing room. The marble walls seemed to echo with anticipation. Cameras tracked every twitch, every glance, every pause. Across the country, phones buzzed with live streams. Social feeds lit up with captions and disbelief. It was the kind of moment when democracy doesn't whisper. It roars, demanding attention. And at the center of it sat Kash Patel. He leaned back, hands clasped as though the stakes were trivial. With each question, he slipped sideways, tossing out rehearsed lines, mocking undertones, a smirk that suggested the photo was just politics. His performance wasn't just evasive, it was dismissive, as if the shame of a judge in chains were nothing but a talking point. Chris Van Hollen didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, every word calibrated with the weight of the image still fresh in the nation's mind. Patel could dodge, but he couldn't erase the cuffs. He could smirk, but he couldn't silence the outrage swelling beyond those walls. The tension thickened with each exchange, a clash between arrogance and accountability. The hearing wasn't just a hearing anymore. It had become a battlefield for the meaning of justice itself. But just when Patel thought he could brush it off, Van Hollen tightened the grip. Kash Patel did not arrive in that chamber as a neutral witness. His name had already become shorthand for something darker in American politics. A career built on loyalty, not to truth, but to power. A former operative who climbed the ranks by defending the indefensible, Patel carved his reputation as a man who thrived in the shadows of controversy. Where others stumbled over facts, he weaponized spin. Where accountability was demanded, he perfected the art of the dodge. From the very beginning, Patel seemed less concerned with the law itself than with how far he could stretch it for the benefit of those he served. His fingerprints could be found on battles over classified documents, partisan investigations, and public campaigns that blurred truth into spectacle. And through it all, one trait became unmistakable: a swaggering arrogance that dared critics to call him out. Soundbites played like a reel of contempt. "Witch hunt," he scoffed at oversight inquiries. "Nothing to see here," he quipped when confronted with evidence that shook public trust. When pressed, he leaned on derision, dismissing journalists as clowns, branding watchdogs as deep state operatives. It wasn't just deflection, it was theater, crafted to undermine any voice that challenged his narrative. But in the days leading to this hearing, the photo of a judge in cuffs had stripped away that protective veneer. For most Americans, the image symbolized a long overdue reckoning, proof that corruption could finally face consequences. Yet Patel chose a different path. Instead of reckoning, he doubled down. He treated the arrest as optics, another round in a political game he thought he could control. In Patel's world, justice was malleable. Consequences could be spun into victories, scandals into distractions. To him, the handcuffs weren't a warning, they were a prop to be minimized, joked about, even brushed aside with a smirk. It was the posture of a man who had convinced himself that accountability was for others. Never for him or his allies, cinematically, Patel was the perfect embodiment of elite impunity, unbothered, insulated, confident that rules bent to the will of the powerful. In his performance before Van Hollen, he wasn't simply defending himself. He was defending the very idea that arrogance could rewrite reality, but arrogance always meets its match. Chris Van Hollen's path to that Senate dais was not carved from spectacle, but from a steady, unshakable commitment to public service. Born and raised in Maryland, the son of a diplomat and a schoolteacher, he inherited both a global perspective and a deep respect for education and community. From the start of his career, Van Hollen built his name not on theatrics but on principle, always grounding his arguments in facts, fairness, and a quiet but unmistakable conviction that public office was a trust, not a weapon. In the House of Representatives and later in the Senate, he became known for his sharp debating style, calm, deliberate, but with a precision that could slice through bluster like a scalpel. His colleagues came to expect that when Van Hollen rose to speak, it would not be with empty rhetoric, but with clarity, logic, and moral weight, whether it was defending affordable health care, fighting for immigrant families, or protecting voting rights. His record carried the through line of someone unwilling to treat justice as negotiable. There were moments in his past that defined him, standing firm when partisan attacks sought to undercut oversight committees, defending whistleblowers when their voices risked being drowned out by intimidation, and reminding his chamber that the Constitution was not a prop to be wielded, but a promise to be honored. In each of these battles, Van Hollen had framed himself not as a performer, but as a protector. That's why his confrontation with Patel struck a deeper chord. To millions watching online, Van Hollen was not just another senator delivering another line of questioning. He was the embodiment of their own frustrations, their yearning for dignity to replace mockery, for truth to rise above distortion. His calm presence, his steady insistence on answers, gave shape to the voice so many ordinary Americans longed to hear. This wasn't just a senator speaking. This was every American who believes in justice, every immigrant family that had sacrificed for a system they were told would protect them. Every citizen who wanted to believe that law still outweighed arrogance. Van Hollen's demeanor in that hearing wasn't dramatic for its own sake, it was purposeful. He didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to. The photo of the judge in cuffs already carried the weight of scandal. His role was to translate that image into accountability. And when Patel tried to sneer his way out, Van Hollen struck back. The clash began slowly, like two fighters circling the ring. Patel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and with a practiced smirk began to sidestep. "Senator," he said, voice dripping with condescension, "this entire process is nothing more than a political stunt. You know it, I know it, the American people know it." His words weren't answers. They were attacks, barbs meant to derail the line of questioning before it could land. Van Hollen didn't blink. He pressed again, sharper this time, cutting through Patel's fog. "This is not theater, Mr. Patel. This is about accountability. A judge in handcuffs is not politics. It is a crisis of trust." Patel chuckled, shaking his head as if the senator were naive. "You're exaggerating. Judges make mistakes. This is hardly the apocalypse." He waved his hand dismissively, as though the photo burned into America's consciousness was nothing but a nuisance. That's when Van Hollen leaned forward, his tone shifting from calm inquiry to controlled force. "Do not belittle this. The American people deserve more than smirks and excuses. They deserve the truth." The chamber leaned in. Staffers froze mid-note. Viewers at home in living rooms and on subway rides felt the tightening coil of confrontation. Each question from Van Hollen landed like a jab, each dodge from Patel like a desperate weave. The rhythm intensified. Blow, counter, dodge, until Patel's grin faltered. The smirk that once seemed untouchable began to look brittle, stretched thin against the senator's precision. The hearing no longer felt like testimony. It felt like a fight with the nation watching each move, but the knockout blow was seconds away. The chamber was already electric, but in that moment, Chris Van Hollen reached beneath his folder and drew out the one image that had seared itself into America's conscience. He held it steady for all to see, the arrest photo of the judge, cuffed, humiliated, frozen in the glare of flashbulbs. The picture landed with more force than any speech could. It wasn't just a prop. It was Exhibit A, the undeniable truth staring back at Patel and every senator in the room. Van Hollen's voice cut through the hush like a blade. "Is this what you call justice, Mr. Patel?" For the first time all morning, Patel faltered. His trademark smirk twitched, his eyes flickered downward, searching for the familiar footing of rehearsed lines. but the ground had shifted beneath him. He muttered something about procedure and political targeting, but the words stumbled out weak, stripped of their usual confidence. The audience in the chamber stirred. You could hear the collective intake of breath, the scraping of pens against notepads, the faint clicking of reporters' keyboards racing to capture the exchange. It was the kind of silence that isn't empty but charged, like the pause before a thunderclap. Online, the moment was already alive. Livestream chats flooded with comments. Finally, someone said it! Van Hollen's not playing around. On Twitter, screenshots of Patel's shaken face appeared within seconds, paired with the photo of the judge, captioned with lines like, "Caught red-handed." TikTok edits stitched Van Hollen's pointed question into a dramatic slow-motion reel, hashtags trending before Patel could even compose his next deflection. Van Hollen didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The photo did the shouting for him. Calmly he pressed again. "You've dismissed this as exaggeration. You've brushed it aside as politics. But tell me, Mr. Patel, how does a nation look at this image and still believe in the integrity of its courts if people like you treat it as a joke?" Patel shifted uncomfortably, his hands tightening into fists against the table. His replies came faster now, sharper, but the cracks showed. He accused Van Hollen of grandstanding, claimed the committee was out of bounds. Yet with every word his voice wavered, his certainty fraying. He was no longer the unflappable operative. He was cornered, defensive, exposed. The hero-villain contrast had reached its peak. Van Hollen stood steady, almost surgical in his dismantling, while Patel crumbled under the weight of his own bravado. The senator's questions were precise cuts, and Patel's evasions only bled credibility. Every dodge became a tell, every deflection a stumble. The once confident spin doctor now looked less like a master of the game and more like a man unraveling in real time. The chamber itself seemed to bear witness to the reversal. Senators who had sat silent now leaned forward. Some pursed their lips, others raised their brows at Patel's faltering posture. Behind Van Hollen, staffers exchanged quick, wide-eyed glances as though recognizing they were watching not just a hearing, but a moment destined for headlines. And those headlines wrote themselves. Van Hollen grills Patel over arrest photo. Senator's question leaves Patel speechless. Arrogance meets its match. The drama unfolded not as a shouting match, but as a revelation. Patel's shield of arrogance had been pierced, not by noise, but by a simple, unyielding truth embodied in a single image. Van Hollen didn't need theatrics. His weapon was clarity, and clarity is devastating when the truth is undeniable. Patel leaned back, visibly smaller than when the hearing began. The smirk was gone, the dismissiveness replaced with a tight jaw, eyes darting as if searching for a lifeline that wouldn't come. Meanwhile, Van Hollen remained composed, unshaken, carrying himself not as one man in an argument, but as the voice of a nation demanding answers. The room seemed to exhale all at once, a collective recognition that something had shifted. For Patel, the hearing was no longer about dodging questions. It was about survival. For Van Hollen, it was about etching into the record, into history, that justice is not a slogan. It is a standard. And in that silence, a larger truth began to echo. Van Hollen let the silence linger, the photo still resting on the table like a mirror America could not look away from. Then he spoke, each word deliberate, carrying the weight of something larger than politics. No one is above the law, not presidents, not operatives, not judges. The words landed with finality, echoing beyond the chamber walls. They weren't just directed at Patel. They were meant for every American watching, every family scrolling through headlines, every young immigrant child learning what democracy is supposed to mean, every citizen who wondered if power would always protect the few. The photo of the judge in cuffs had shocked the nation. Yes, but in Van Hollen's framing, it became more than a scandal. It became a warning that when justice falters, the very foundation of the republic trembles. And yet, in the same breath, it was also a reminder that accountability is still possible, that arrogance can still be humbled, that democracy has the resilience to confront its own failings if its people demand it. This was the moral clarity so many yearned for, the reassurance that truth still matters, that dignity still matters, that the system is only as strong as those willing to defend it. But this fight is far from over. Chris Van Hollen's grilling of Kash Patel wasn't just a takedown, It was a message written into the heart of American democracy. A senator's voice, steady and unyielding, cut through the smirks and evasions to remind the nation of something we cannot afford to forget. Dignity and truth will always outlast arrogance and deceit. The photo of a judge in handcuffs may have shocked us, but Van Hollen's response transformed it from a spectacle into a statement. It wasn't about one man in cuffs. It wasn't even about Patel. It was about us, about the kind of country we want to be, about whether justice is real or just another slogan. In that chamber, Van Hollen stood for every American who has ever felt the weight of corruption pressing down, every immigrant who believed in the promise of fairness, every citizen who still dares to hope that accountability isn't dead. This moment, replayed on screens across the country, wasn't simply politics. It was a reminder that arrogance can be challenged, that silence can be broken, that truth still has defenders in the halls of power. And it left us with a choice. If you believe accountability still matters in America, share this story. Subscribe to join a movement that refuses to let arrogance rewrite our democracy. Together, we prove that justice still has a voice.